Hey guys, I'm gonna get into something. Supposed to get into something of an interesting topic here. So I think what grabs me the most about music all around is that it does feel like an escape, a suppression, you could say, from a feeling that I really don't think I'm actually interested in pursuing in the end because I almost literally have that. I realized from a very young age I've had this like pleasure satisfied entirely by way of just listening to a lot of music and I feel like I've now come to a point where I can kind of see the coldness living inside of all of that. So that brings me to a fresh kind of understanding of okay, so I think my favorite music of all time is music that is very disinterested in sexual activity or pleasure of any sort. Because you just get to a point where you just see like it seems like explore the desire to explore fetishes leads to a dark hole ultimately. It's just what it seems like. A lot of this communicates. So it just brings so many fears and a lot of anxieties. By myself. So I kind of like just sort of having a complete escape from it and rather perceive my curiosity into a drive to work on film and stuff and like create stuff about the feeling complicated emotions, exploring complicated emotions that can stem out of it. It's like detachment, loneliness, and just sort of confessing to a coldness while, being productive about the reasons along the way for myself and, building a community and foundation with others. But that's why I like to apply intense distance, in a lot of ways. But I think just asexuality in general. That's how I define it at this point. It's like I think certain music kind of subconsciously just sort of taught me this from a young age, it feels like. So I just kind of want to cover about 10 or 15 that particularly hit me. Just kind of why in a lot of ways. But ultimately, I think the best music of all time is out to just sort of express something of a disinterest in sexual pleasure and rather something spiritual, of a spiritual desire, that you want to meet for yourself. I think the first band I'll mention is R.E.M. They're my favorite band of all time. But it feels like there's just zero sexual energy living in all of their albums from Chronic Town all the way up to All Night for the People. There was one afterwards called Monster where Michael Stipe was a little sexually frustrated, but I feel like it's just not a big theme for them whatsoever. And I feel like I really love that about their sound so much. It's so refreshing how they're just expressing purity and what it is to just romp around in nature. I think that's what you almost see a substitute of just like a love for an intense love and connection to nature. And sort of just feeling all the emotions, of highs and lows along the way, and sort of finding an ultimate fulfillment in that, living that way, and seeing, like through the unfulfilled moments, I'm kind of just like going on a dirty, and I feel better ultimately for having gone through it, it's like going to hell and coming back stronger to heaven, and back, and it runs endlessly. It's like ultimate journey. That's kind of how R.E.M. sort of functions as well. A very, very free-spirited town of Athens, Georgia. And I feel like through their whole path, they were just entirely concerned about the youthful experience of growing up, manhood. And, the divide of just like intense like introversion, romping in the forest to bringing their pleasures out to the world, basically. The pleasures that they found in the forest. Like they bring it out to the world, but, in a way that's like socially conscious. Because a lot of that roamed in the forest. And this is where I'm kind of trying to come into play of like cold-heartedness. It feels like a lot of that just doesn't exactly like hold up, because I feel like finding something in the air and being able to have this sort of impersonal connection with other people just feels too good, It feels like having a connection with Mother Nature as something of like an ultimate force of love is sort of feels better, I guess is the best way to describe. I don't want to say like is anything I think anyone can see this, but no matter where your status is, if you are married, a lot of this certain music sort of does work through like deep sort of the thoughts, like envy that comes from all that, of course, but it's like it does it in a way that's so subconscious that I never feel a desire to express any of that whatsoever. And you only get to the good sides once you're, in the social realm. That's what I mean. That's like the kind of way that R.E.M. sort of was expressing, just having fun in life and just meeting people, and having a good journey, good perspective, and healthy heart all along the way your journey, and just like it's okay, it's kind of what R.E.M.'s all about. Like it's through everything you go through, it's all good kind of feeling. It's sort of what rumps around their music. Yeah, I love them so much. They're absolutely perfect. And another one is Joanna Newsom. I love her music so much, and I feel like as far as like my favorite female musicians, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Kate Bush and Bjork as well. But I feel like there's certainly a love for sex. I mean, Bjork had an entire album dedicated to it, which ironically is my favorite one, but because it kind of takes me through an understanding of what a lot of sexual pleasure is without actually having to go through it. wow, I think that, Kate Bush was certainly interested in a lot of her earlier albums. She certainly expressed a lot of interest in sex, although she kind of, I think, quit around the Dreaming and the Hounds of Love era, but still, Joanna Newsom just completely is devoid of this kind of energy. It's complete childlike wonder and innocence, and that's really what I think is the most fascinating part of this, female women, in general. Like, getting straight to the childlike wonder, removing all that sexual tension and energy surrounding it, 'cause that stinks, literally. Like, it smells bad to me, and this smells good to just sort of be away from that sort of energy in the moment, not too close, keeping it in person. There's a lot of eccentric personality and just playfulness coming out through all of this music. I love the album, like Yes, Have One on Me, beautiful triple album, which is just so, oh man, there's like about 10 or 12 masterpieces on it. It's so perfect. And California is my favorite song she did, perhaps. And then Divers, which is my favorite album she did. That's a perfect album. Again, this is just like an ultimate expression of just like childlike wonder and innocence kind of coming out. Her voice is certainly like just a wonderful one, I think, because it's sort of like it just sort of like takes you right to it in the way that like a jazz artist would do, but she does it her way entirely in her own kind of world. And it kind of builds up to something that just feels like it is an expression of just something just kind of better. I think she would describe it as like a place that's just better than herself. It's just she's searching for, and she finds it and expresses it throughout her music. It's just, entirely perfect. It feels like truly going into a Narnia like landscape. Somewhere just completely better than anywhere you'll ever hear, perhaps. It's just so beautiful, this journey. Unique journey for sure. I'm getting it for like 2006 to like 2015. So again, it kind of washes over me in time. I'm like, okay, this is when I was growing up. That's so cool. It's beautiful, man. I mean, absolutely beautiful stuff right here. It's just like that, exactly the buzz and a feeling of just having like a crush on just someone you're with. This feels so good, but and I kind of just want the limits to be there because it's literally too precious, and the moment can't last, but man, you just want to hold it while it's there because it's so sweet and so good. Yeah, it's Joanna Newsom. It's awesome. Another band, and of course this is a little bit of an interesting case, but Nirvana, because I feel like there's a few songs that do with sex, but they're very anti-sex ultimately, because they're either they sound like they're just really drained and tired of it. I think that's what made a lot of Nirvana unique. There's like a lot of perhaps a lot of sexual energy they've had, but they're just what they express in the albums is just like intense boredom and tiredom in a lot of ways, particularly on the song like Breed. Just like wanting to get away from that, just get into something a little more youthful and innocent, personal to Kurt Cobain, like Drain You kind of too. I mean, and then of course like In Utero, that's a depressing expression of in a lot of ways, I think. And I grew up listening to a lot of Nirvana, so maybe this was also a lot of subconscious influence of the way I've shaped out to be with this perspective, like Rape Me. Holy God, that song, that's one right there. Polly, I mean, that's off Nevermind. That's a horrible story that happened of Kurt Cobain whenever he was performing live. Apparently, like this scenario had happened outside of the stadium. And this literally depressed him so bad. I know that there was an audience cheering him on, playing the song while that act was happening. It's like, wow, yeah. That's Nirvana. They were not. I could tell Kurt Cobain. It reminded me a lot of like someone like Nick Drake, who I'll mention later. I'm gonna really get into that one. But Nirvana really is just a pretty great band of expressing what, this disinterested sex really feels like. Almost harshly the emotional side of a lot of ways, an intense rejection towards Mother Nature, you could say. It's like a good way to describe a lot of what they're doing. It's really quite fantastic. And actually the first band I really got into, I think it was like 2006, 2007. I remember going out on the beach on a beach trip for like a couple of weeks. I remember just getting into them and just going out in the ocean listening to this. It just felt so organically close to home. Especially the album Nevermind, just the first time I ever really wanted to just look at the lyrics and just really understand them for myself. And I think I just kind of grew up to be a love for poetry in a lot of ways. So that's really, really cool. And I feel like the whole way through, not interested in, the sexual worldly pleasures. I think that's a really distinctive and awesome quality about them. On another one, Tom Waits. And I feel like this is interesting because Tom Waits is a storyteller. I mean, he's always going on about like, a lot of people who are interested in sex, and he ultimately is fascinated by these kind of people. I think I relate heavily to this kind of perspective. Of course, Tom Waits ended up being a married man, but it's like I could hear how like that kind of just put him into like, whoa, I'm not going to talk about that. I want to kind of get to like where the people who are suffering are going through. I think those are the most interesting kind of musicians, where it's just like you just get to a point where you're happy. It seems like you have a fulfillment in your life, but then there's like something entirely that has to be done. There's like a whole other side to you. Those are the most interesting kind of people, of all time to me, right? Personally, I get so much mystique built by those kinds, and Tom Waits is kind of the ultimate version of that. Bob Dylan's a lot like this too. It's just like, there's a lot of like they want to explore a lot of. They're like in a sleazy world, and they kind of want to get out of it, but they're there and they don't complain about it. It's like they're holding themselves in the urban cities, and it's just. Oh, I love the albums. Like Swordfish Trombones, Rain Dogs, particularly. They just really are amazing songs, amazing albums about. They really explore something that's just natural. So Closing Time too. That was like a very innocent album about like childlike wonder growing up. None of them really are just too interested in worldly pleasures. That's why I love so much about his world building. It's just all like kind of this grounded mysticism and fantasy the entire way through, and it's so amazing. Just like carnival, like what he's expressing. He feels like the ultimate like circus man. It's really, really cool. Really, really fascinating. And there's a band called The Fall, and I haven't listened to him too much, but I ought to take a deeper dive because I know there's a guy in the band named lead singer Marquis Smith, and he has like a particular hatred for sex that's expressed through this band. I think a lot of sexual energy was in music. And punk was actually, I think, the first movement to really look right through it and be like, I don't want to say it. It kind of stinks, more than it's awesome. So you just kind of want to just get raw about it. It's even looking at like subject matter in the 80s that came such as pornography. That really became a huge theme. A lot of masturbation and pornography, being open and loud about it all. Sometimes. Like guys like Prince were certainly onto that one, especially like the shame and that even comes along with all that. But yeah, they're a band I don't get more into because of all that. That really fascinates me more now that I look into it. And another one is Arcade Fire. I feel like that's like when I listen to their lyrics, it sounds like they're entirely looking at childlike wonder and innocence, and they're not really too interested, like in anything outside of that. I certainly hear a certain freedom when I hear their music, especially the album. It's amazing. Really like the Suburbs as well, and Reflector. I actually like I know that one gets a lot of flack, but I really love the sound of that album. That's a really good one. But yeah, there's some really good stuff. I should explore them more too. They're a band I think outside of Funeral and Suburbs. I haven't really deeply explored their impact. They might perhaps be a certain definition of what the 2000s, which isn't really felt like, which is certainly I think what's really catching up to me through all this. I kind of have a huge question mark at what the 2000s was doing exactly. I think especially after talking about the band Radiohead, I feel like now it's just like I think a lot of this truly was a disinterest in a lot of sexual expression. I feel like I look at my youth and growing up, and I feel like I was around, I think, intelligent people who really were also kind of seeing the same thing. Even if there's a challenge if you might want it for yourself, but that that's not everything too. You can recognize that quality in other people that may not be searching for that so much, and that's beautiful. Yeah, that's so cool. This is a band that's been catching up to me a lot. Like, I feel like Rage Against the Machine. I really like this band. They got a good sound, especially because I was going through their albums, and it's like just good. Pure, just like hard rock that's completely disinterested in sexual energy. It's just completely going for rawness and just a lot of like political angst that's perfectly expressed by way of Zach De La Rocca. Honestly, it's the instrumentation that I'm more concerned about here because Tom Morello just lays it out honestly masterfully. It is a very unique kind of guitarist that come out in the 90s where he adds a lot of a lot of hip hop influence, but into metal basically. It's a very unique sound. Metal is a genre I've kind of gotten a little bit drained of over the years because I feel like overall most genres I kind of come to because there's kind of like it feels like there's a foundation and a reason, and I feel like metal is often just unspecified angst, and it usually, and I know a lot of people will disagree, and I'm not trying to say that I feel this way like for others, but for me personally on my walk, I just kind of feel like it sometimes feels too unspecified. I think jazz honestly took me there in a way that I think I just am a little more engulfed. I'm more engulfed by simply because it's like the same. I think a lot of guys like Coltrane were kind of doing a lot of the similar things in the 60s, which is just really, really fascinating. The midst of everything going on. Rage Against the Machine, they're awesome. They're definitely one of the best bands of the 90s, I think. Just expressing just pure hard rock, like kind of continuing a lot of like Metallica energy kind of too. Like, that's really cool. But yeah, I like Metallica. I don't love them. I grew up with them a little over time. That might be a little too much angst, I think, for my taste. That's a little too much raw angst. I want the angst to be Radiohead style. I think they nailed angst perfectly with everything Computer today. That's literally the level right there. And a band that came really close to that, of course, is Pink Floyd. I think there's something of a suppression going on in a lot of Pink Floyd's music. That's what I kind of recognize these days. That kind of makes them not necessarily one of my all-time favorite bands these days. Although they're a great band, and I certainly enjoy getting deep into like Animals is one of the best albums of all time. So is Wish You Were Here. I love Dark Side of the Moon. Metal's great. But overall, I think that there's an impact there. I've just simply like I think literally Radiohead kind of made it completely personal. And I think Pink Floyd perhaps is a bit of a foundation that kind of contributed to a lot of my cold-hearted perspectives in a lot of ways. And I kind of see the fascination of that, but I kind of do see like almost like okay, there's almost a certain suppression happening, particularly in Roger Waters. Where it just feels like all these albums are kind of contributing to a breakdown that happens on the wall, which literally just feels so real that it's not one of my favorite depictions of a breakdown, really. It just kind of feels like it's okay. I think Roger Waters literally got completely tormented in a way. And it almost maybe just shows the consequences of just like maybe too much of a sexual repression, you could say. But they don't express sex at all in the music. It entirely feels like it's focused on something else entirely. Especially like David Gilmour's guitar. I don't know. I feel like they kind of laid out this perfect, just kind of fascination on the greater good at all times. Perhaps Roger Waters is like a walking example of being too cold-hearted. You could say that's a perfect exemplification of just a man who's just way too, progressive rock energy. Like he laid out something absolutely perfect by Dark Side of the Moon. It's like ego just kind of gets to your head in a way, and it's like absolutely massive. I'm sure there was like an unspecified sexual frustration playing into a lot of this. That's why I increasingly recognize, and as any rock star, like, they don't. You can tell Roger Waters is 100% just interested in expressing this in the music. Like that's entirely done by his personal way. And he's awesome. I love his particular work with David Gilmour. Of course, it's a great balance. And I'm like, 100% want to be like the David Gilmour and the other guys. They're all chill guys, while Roger Waters was just like going mad. And again, it didn't even contribute to the best breakdown on the wall. Like great moments, obviously comfortably numb, Hey You, they're perfect masterpieces, but the songs, but it's like a lot of stuff in here is just kind of, I feel like Roger Waters is literally too, like, I think letting out too much sexual torment in his own way. And it's like suppressed in a way that really does feel haunting, and I think that, again, that's where a band like Radiohead had to come around and just be like, yeah, dude, like, let's just say it, man. Like this, they were just saying it. Like, this stinks. Yeah. We see a hell and it stinks. But, we're rising above that, kind of thing. Roger Waters was just past the point of return here. And the story is that the most best when you kind of look at their reflection of childlike wonder by way of their missing band Sid Barrett. Like that's the thing about Pink Floyd. They had ultimate childlike wonder by way of just missing their childhood best friend. Like that's kind of what the foundation of their magic really contributes to. It's really, really beautiful. Yeah, they're one of the best bands. I mean, their legacy certainly holds up for sure. And I mean, I kind of take that back when I said not one of my favorites. I think I just really needed to kind of step back from them for a while because this is such a suppressed sexual energy that perhaps could be relatable while I'm making this film in a lot of ways. I might be finding a lot of this kind of conflict going on in myself right now. Not like a lot of these bands are the ultimate expressions of soothing that to me. Rather than caving deeper into those kind of moods for perhaps a momentary relief. I think I'd rather just kind of see it as this exists and it's impersonal, but you kind of just become wiser along the way if you just don't like actually go for it. You rather let more of an ego sacrifice to the way you feel about this. It's like it's something that's not yours kind of thing. So you just simply let it go. Be surprised what happens. Like that's the way it's been feeling in a lot of ways when the best moments come around. The band like The Clash came around. Oh yeah, they're a great one too. Because I feel like they're all about social commentary. I really love The Clash. I think they increasingly are my favorite punk band because they're all about really just going from the social commentary and I think that's because I know they sound like they're particularly irritated by the Beatles energy, and that's almost like a depressing foundation I've had to come to over the years. I think I turned to the Beatles entirely as a band that I just felt like that joy and childlike wonder. But I think I grew up and the more I really studied the whole story, I'm like, okay, like the difference between me and those guys is okay, a ton of sexual energy certainly got me into all that, but of course they had a way of spiritual expression just like the jazz artists did. I'm sure a lot of sexual energy was technically going on, but they knew how to just say it just right and lend their hand to somebody like who is not interested. And I feel like it's still ultimately friendly and it invites and ultimately adds up, with that asexual perspective on life. It actually dies, the way that the Beatles do it. That's unique. I'm not on the Beatles, but the Clash. I feel like they were just kind of more about doing a similar thing, but just kind of being like, stop acting so happy. I think that's what gets draining. That's the level. It's like somehow there's still like a level of like, I want to live some life. I want to feel a certain way. And, like envy can always come around. And the band like The Clash is just like, look at it and just chill, man. You could stand by someone who's getting something in a different kind of way, but they had an angst to express, but it comes from like a loving place ultimately. That's what makes it work so well. And I mean, they're pretty great. I especially enjoy the album London Calling is pretty fantastic. It's worth checking out. A lot of great moments on that one, especially Training Day and Stand By Me. That's a wonderful, wonderful song. Another punk band that had a lot of this is the Ramones. Like they're a silly band. I honestly come back to them, and I kind of quite enjoy their energy. I mean, they're pretty just like crazy about. And it's not like they're just always more interested in just like campy movies than sexual energy. I feel like they're just interested in just like kind of just like art or all the art around them in New York City in the 70s, just kind of looking at all of it and just going like, let's just let's just jam, let's simplify all this depression. Don't even say the depression, just freaking enjoy ourselves. Let's not even worry about any of this madness. That's again, hearing a lot of punk is expressing sort of something that's anti-sexual. I certainly increasingly hear a lot of that. But I kind of prefer the pop and melodic side. It feels like a lot of bands were continuing that foundation the Beatles laid out, and to like, okay, let's minimize the sexual energy. That's the thing. I think, and a lot of these were kind of getting there successfully. And a really underrated band, they were from particularly throughout the '80s, called Game Theory, and it features a man who is literally confessed as an asexual named Scott Miller. And I love their melodies so much because honestly, he's kind of like low-key like one of my biggest heroes next to like Michael Stipe, of R.E.M. as far as kind of having that asexual's perspective, because they kind of see a pointlessness, to all of that. But they also are in tune with just something of a greater force that needs to be said and expressed, because it feels like it's heartbreaking to not say this, because it feels like a lot of that, like, sexual desire has kind of become something spiritual and heartfelt. So you don't even feel bad for having those, thoughts anymore, and you kind of don't even worry about the pursuit of it, because when you live for an ego sacrifice, you're not concerned with those, worldly pleasures for too long period of a time. There has to be that moment of separation. And honestly, by way of separation could just be happiness and joy by way of pop music. And that's what Scott Miller was ultimately hearing throughout the album Lolita Nation. I mean, that's kind of just taking all the awkward energy, all the strangeness that you feel, and just having a good time. And so such a good time that no one freaking cares. It's like, yeah, come on. That sort of is a way to build a foundation for yourself. Be motivated rather than depressed about it. That sort of is like a challenging but necessary angle. Like to turn that depression about it into a motivation. And see a uniqueness and originality behind it, and just see where that takes you. In a lot of ways, I really love that about this band. I really recommend them. Honestly, I feel like there's just so much to say about this band. Honestly, I mean, they're really unique in what they laid out. Very underrated kind of way. They had all these songs that remind me heavily of like the R.E.M. magic in a lot of ways. Kind of a lot of jangle pop going on. Like The Real Sheila is a perfect song. My favorite one, besides the bass line, Go Ahead, You're Dying To. That takes me to a real absolute place. But a song called Mammoth Gardens, that's one of the best songs. Check out this album if you haven't heard of it. I mean, it's pretty unique. It sounds like a lot of guys sound like apparently huge fans of Stanley Kubrick. Also a director who feels like they're on an asexual kind of perspective too. It kind of adds up to this perspective in so many different ways. It's pretty awesome. Another one is Modest Mouse. They're really fascinating to me. They were in the late 90s, and I love this band. They really just have been coming back to me as just one of my all-time favorites, because it feels like they're just kind of always on a rant, and it feels like that rant is particularly sexually frustrated in its own kind of way. But they walk it such a cool way that you just don't care, and that's sort of what a lot of the late 90s was kind of getting to the foundation of. It's like kind of just not caring about expressing everything about yourself. And I think a lot of the dark side of that and seedy side of that is just like, yeah, even like sexual torment, and whatnot. And all this is expressed through like Modest Mouse's work, especially like Lonesome Crowded West. Like that's a perfect album of the late 90s. And I love the bass work in that album so much. All the songs just really do capture a particular brand of loneliness, but getting comfortable with just the adventure of life and by way of simplicity, just meeting people along the way, and having fond particular moments and bonds, while just kind of like living life and happiness for yourself ultimately. And that's sort of like what I hear a lot expressed throughout, this album. It's so wonderful. I absolutely love it. And the Moon and Antarctica just continues this in even, perhaps an even better, more atmospheric kind of way. So it's just like, it just gets better in the year 2000 for them. Reminds me a lot of like the production and stuff like that Radiohead is putting into it. And these guys are just having a lot of fun while being moody and mysterious. That's kind of what makes them stand out in a lot of ways. There's a real sense of like just being a pirate on a ship and just going on a real adventure. And these guys are like one of the ultimate bands of doing it. It reminds me a lot of what like R.E.M. was doing in the 80s, but now with a little more of a harshness. And now, again, like just the sexual frustration just sounds like, I just don't care. Like I'm feeling moody. I don't care. Like that's a lot of the late 90s was kind of coming down to. And the difference to express moodiness. And yeah, it's like Isaac Brock, great lyricist. I love the Life Like Weeds is my favorite song off that album. They're pretty great. But good lord, the band Alice in Chains, my god. So it's ironic because they actually started off as a glam rock band, but I think intense drug use was so harsh throughout the nature of this band. I think that alone is almost like about as intense as the movie Requiem for a Dream. And there's just absolutely nothing sexual about this. Jeez. The album Dirt is so depressing. Like, one of the most depressing bands I've ever heard. One of the best, I think, at expressing defeat within just intense addiction, which I'm sure could apply to like a sex addiction as well. But I mean, a drug addiction is what's really particularly, because I feel like there's a lot of that goes hand to hand. It seems like a lot of, drug addiction, sex addiction. But they certainly express this in a way that just really hits it home. And it just certainly is like an ultimate sacrifice, really, because that's what like Lane Stanley was doing. Jerry Control was just completely supporting this man's unique heart and soul. This man was an addict. And he was just like, here I am, and I'm just gonna say it how I'm feeling. I'm rotting, I'm dying. Literally, he's like on the verge of death, like through a lot of this stuff, and he's just like, okay, like this is what it feels like, y'all. I'm here. In these really, really dark depths. And I certainly grew up listening to a lot of this. And I think, along with like Nirvana, hearing something of a cautionary tale in my perspective, hearing something is anxious and maybe something, is kind of wrong in the air just as much as everything's maybe all right in spirit, kind of thing. Feeling very, very sensitive to all that can relate to something else. I love the song, or I love the band, yes. They're on the flip side. I think they're the ultimate expression of joy within ultimate just fantasy. I mean, they're the ultimate space cadets. I mean, they're so good. I freaking love the album Close to the Edge as well as Fragile. I mean, and I feel like King Crimson comes very, very close to coming to this as well, but they do have a couple songs that are like not in the Court of the Crimson King or Red. Obviously, those are harshly removed from sexual energy, but there's a few albums in between, like Islands, and like earlier, some of their psychedelic stuff in the early 70s was kind of sexually driven. So, yes is the band, though. I mean, golly, these guys are just literally about the most joyful band at expressing what it is and just being a complete detachment from, that stuff. And just feeling happy and joy, kind of continuing the foundation of the Beatles. It reminds me a lot of, like, the Abbey Road sound and taking them further completely progressive rock angles. It's pretty amazing. I mean, they have one of the best sounds for sure, as far as just, expressing a labyrinth of just an adventure and something that feels like a science fiction travel, or exploring like the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey, just going through this, labyrinth, just colors endlessly in places. But it's not completely psychedelic. It's like it sounds like. It's kind of just wondrous, and it just feels like it is a grounded fantasy completely of like kind of bringing Narnia to planet Earth. It's pretty amazing stuff. Oh, and I love the band. I'm back. Well, I said my favorite punk band of all time, actually, right here. I said The Clash earlier, but no, it's got to be Television. Television is genius. I love Tom Verlaine is the best guitarist sound. And I feel like this sound, especially on Marquee Moon, is completely removed from sexual energy. They are completely fascinated by the tone and their melodies to a cold extent. They're a band of coldness and having fun in their coldness. Like they're kind of just going all the way in. A lot of ways, by ways like Velvet Underground. That's all a lot of, I think, this great music in the 60s and 70s was certainly doing, like having fun and just confessing to the cold hardness, but you understand why when you kind of dive into their worlds and their minds, which is what Tom Verlaine expresses here, something of an awkward and anxious energy. That's what kind of continued the foundation of what a lot of bands like Velvet Underground were doing, like expressing anxious and awkward energy in the midst of a city. And this tone here is just wonderful. I mean, a wonderful escapism kind of lives in this album. I mean, the melodies, like in the song Venus, and the self-titled song, all the songs, literally every song on here is about a freaking masterpiece in their own kind of way. It's absolutely amazing what they did here. And I just mentioned this band recently, but Radiohead, of course, they're all the most like biggest examples of just like an asexual perspective on life. Like a lot of the filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick, PTA. It feels kind of like PTA is kind of diving into it, finding love in it. That's why they use my favorite director of all time. Still is. Radiohead expresses this kind of a music format. I mean, that's the thing. I don't know. Like these guys must have had some sort of awful fetish living in there or something, because their music expression was just harsh. I feel like about the least sexual music ever. They're entirely anti-sex. It sounds like, and they just really wanted to express something better than that. And they literally do it by going, that's Radiohead's magic and the way of ultimate expression for the future. I think that is like one of the harshest qualities that's kind of come out of the internet, honestly. And I mean, to be just completely straightforward, a lot of sexual frustration, I certainly think. And I think bands like this are kind of what you need to kind of just look past those feelings, harsh kind of pathetic feelings that can come along the way of falling into stuff like that. You build your curiosity at all the wrong places. Everything just gets warped and messed up. But, you get creative. I mean, you get that's what Radiohead's kind of there to kind of comfort you in a lot of ways. For to see that these are human and normal things, but you kind of figure it out for yourself along the way. From there, it becomes a very personal journey and search. The band The Deer Hunter. I mean, Bradford Cox. I only heard one of their albums, but he's literally a confirmed asexual. I love that song Desire Lines. That's one of my favorite songs of all time. That does express the feeling perfectly of like wanting to express something spiritual, but it's completely pretentious in the eyes of the world because it's coming from an honest place that isn't going to mean much to a lot of people if you say it straightforwardly. So you have to, be abstract, in a certain kind of way. But I think the best artist of all time to express a asexual perspective on life. This is perhaps even deeper than the one guy who got even deeper about it than Radiohead is Nick Drake. Oh my gosh, he only made like 3 distinctive albums, but I don't hear one bit of sexual energy whatsoever throughout his entire run. He had 3 albums, like late 60s, early 70s, completely man of disinterested sex, and it's literally kind of weird. He never had it, so I completely relate to this man. No innuendos, there's just nothing about this man. And I think it's throughout, what he's expressing in these albums is a complete disinterest. He's seeing all the, this is like, again, out of the 60s. Like, this literally sounds like the 2000s happening in the 60s, literally. That's what's so fascinating and unique about Nick Drake. A real depressing joy is kind of what's being heard here. And it's quite warm and cozy, but it's certainly depressed, because he sees that. He sees just something depressing in society, honestly, and he just has something. Sometimes when you feel like you're suppressed from these kind of things, something smells so rotten that you just almost have to search. The foundation of feeling good for yourself is in the cold-heartedness that lives in this. Is you're searching it for yourself entirely. You're going to do it removed from what anybody else says. It's almost like I'm going to do it my way, and I don't care what anybody says. And I think that's the definition of sort of like the youthful angst in a lot of ways. So I think guys like this were just so ahead of their time, and a lot of the 2000s was out to, I think, picked up a time to sort of say this. It's just like expressing the nature of simplicity and difference. It doesn't have to be so like this, but it is like this. And of course, Nick Drake relays out an ultimate ego sacrifice, throughout his progression. Unless the last album, all these albums are just perfect. It's like 5 Leaves Left is just a really great opener, and I feel like then Brighter Later is kind of like where he got a little more maximal of the sound, and then Pink Moon was like more minimal. That's the best one he did, because oh man, I was like, he made that short before his young unfortunate death. He didn't even get to live to see himself become popular or anything. As far as he knew, only a couple thousand people knew he was. He was this is a really, really sad story. Now he's like ascended to, the cult status of one of the greatest genius musicians to have lived, most certainly so. And what he expresses here certainly contributes a lot to that asexual perspective of just living life for the beautiful moments. But then letting the challenge be for yourself. How am I going to connect with other people? It's the foundation in a lot of ways comes down to it seems limiting to live this way. But I know that there's something here that is worthwhile, but an artist, or it seems like a lot of these artists are seeing this kind of thing of like, so what am I going to do about it? It leaves a lot of questions, but it kind of forces you to search for an answer in a way that kind of kicks my hiney in a way that I like it at the end, because it feels closer and rooted in a way that does make me grow up as a foundation and kind of hear something of a notion of, okay, you can express something better than yourself. Whatever you feel, if you express something better for yourself, you can find fulfillment in that. Don't be concerned about being the, how popular you are, how big this gets. Rather be concerned with just being an original and just always doing it and meaning and being real about it. Whatever way that is to you, just like, this is honest. So this is going to last. This will have power in a few days, that kind of thing. I think a lot of motivation kind of comes from the idea of intuition, believing in something of a greater force at all times. And just sort of like seeing a calm in the madness and being in tune with that calm. And just what it's like to be in that moment of just endless prayer. And that's what music, I think, is out to do ultimately. And these are the guys, I think, who do it the best, outside of the Beatles. Like, I think they really do it with the most. That's the continuing foundation of the Beatles. There had to be a minimization of some sort, I think. I think the Beatles laid out something so perfect that a lot of people, half the world wasn't equipped for it, it feels like. So now all these other guys have to come around And the way to clean that up is to just, no, it's not the sex, it's not the drugs, it's life, and it has to be lived, in all its glory, in order to feel that fulfillment, and only you can find that for yourself. But every person has to find that in their own way. You know it when you have it. It's that simple. Yeah, that's what's up.